Hi, everybody. My name is Ianessa Humbert. You probably know me from the Down the Hatch podcast about swallowing or from critical thinking and dysphagia management courses. I've also been on faculty at various institutions where I've learned that strategic planning is an ongoing effort. It got me thinking about strategic planning and dysphagia management as well. Now, you might be wondering who should do the planning. Certainly the leaders of dysphagia management should send down their initiatives to clinicians so they can go to work. Well, my view is that whoever has a stake in dysphagia management should also have a say in dysphagia management. So what's my point? To date, I've given almost 100 invited talks to clinicians, primarily speech pathologists who manage dysphagia. And I'd like to share a few key observations and try to fit them into the strategic planning framework called SWOT, SWOT, which stands for Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities, and Threats. Let's start with the strengths. These are trends that have emerged that I've noticed over the last 15 years of giving talks. My very first talk was with Christy Ludlow at the American Speech Language Hearing Association on a topic called Hot Topics in Swallowing, and it was an Easton talk, and people nearly killed each other. We're not there anymore, hopefully. And I think that number one is clinicians' eagerness to learn. Over the years of teaching students, they're obsessed with their grade. And then they get out in the real world and it's like, oh my God, I have to know this stuff. Competence supersedes grades, and it's probably why so many CEU courses on swallowing are pretty well attended. Number two, willingness to take a good, hard look at our profession in the mirror. More and more, I'm finding that clinicians are able to say, hey, we need to figure out where we are in order to improve. In the Critical Thinking and Dysphagia Management course, I started out with a talk called Elucidating Inconsistencies in Dysphagia Management. And in that talk, I start out talking about the published and unpublished criticisms of clinicians managing dysphagia, as well as highlighting papers that show that there is very poor clinician agreement and understanding of swallowing physiology. Usually by the time I get to the end of that course, clinicians are nodding, going, okay, yeah, we need to do something. It really breaks the ice, and importantly, it sort of gives us a level playing field to say, all right, we all need to get through this together. Number three, without question, an important strength is that clinicians have a strong desire to help patients. There aren't clinicians showing up to these things saying, I actually don't give a rat's ass if anybody gets better. It's driven by a desire to help people. Okay, now let's talk about the weaknesses. Yeah, we're gonna have to hold hands on this one. Go ahead, unclench your sphincters. We can do this together. But they're pretty important, okay? Now, a really, really big important one is the fear of aspiration. Oh my goodness. The moans and groans that I would hear throughout the audience when a video of aspiration is shown, they're still not diminishing after all these years. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar with what aspiration is, it's when you ingest food, or anything for that matter, and instead of going into your esophagus and then your stomach, it goes into your larynx, also known as your voice box, and then importantly, aspiration means it's now in your trachea. So what am I trying to say here? There's still an immense fear of aspiration going on among clinicians who manage dysphagia. And when I hear all this going on in the audience because I show a video of somebody aspirating, I usually have to pause and say, guys, can you imagine if you went to have a surgery and you found out that every time that surgeon opened somebody up, he or she freaks out because there's blood? Do you really want someone like that getting so distracted that they can't even focus on the task because they're afraid of blood? It reminds me of those American Funniest Videos play loops or blooper loops where they show like some poor guy getting kicked, or a bunch of poor guys getting kicked in the balls over and over and over again. And it's like, by like, a pet, a child, or some random, skateboard or something like that. I mean, that's exactly what it sounds like to me. And it seems like we should be able to handle this by now. It's what we do. We should be able to manage it. So why does this need to stop? Well, your opinion of the presence of aspiration impacts how reactive you are, how you might make recommendations. You might be too freaked out to test multiple trials, and importantly, the patient then doesn't benefit from this. Okay, I'm gonna share something with you. Only about 3 people on the planet probably really know this about me, but I am horrified over horror films. I can't stand them. I'm always too scared. In fact, I'm one of those people where after watching a scary movie, everything freaks me out. I'm like, have you seen that video with the lady with the lobsters? Like, look at her. She can't get the job done. She can't be bothered to figure out what the problem is. She overreacts and just runs off, okay?
Oh, have mercy.
Guys, this is not an SLP horror flick, okay? In fact, I understand not wanting to give patients food if you're a clinician who's afraid of aspiration. I mean, I'm the one screaming at Scooby-Doo like, Shaggy, Scooby, if you're afraid, why do you keep going into the scary castle? I don't understand. And if you can't stop being afraid of aspiration as somebody who's there to help ameliorate it, maybe dysphagia management isn't for you. Yeah, I said it. I'm not afraid of SLPs. All right, guys, now we're gonna do the third and final one, which is a weakness, which has continued and not improved after all of these years of giving talks, and it's physiology. Guys, I want you to understand how important it is. And I know you think it's important, but let me just give you this as an example for how I set this up to really drive the point home that swallowing physiology is both very important yet unknown and not well understood among the individuals who are the specialists who manage swallowing. So, I'll say, hey, how many of you guys have seen patients who have swallowing problems because of some laryngeal issue? And almost every hand will be raised at this point. And then I'll say, guys, bear with me through this exercise. What's the muscle that allows my fist to get closer to my shoulder? And everyone will scream out, biceps, 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 biceps. There's an echo. I'll say, guys, what is the muscle that enables me to kick my leg out straight? Quadriceps, quadriceps, quadriceps. And I'll say, now expecting an even bigger response, not really. Guys, what's the muscle groups, or what are the muscles that elevate the larynx? Crickets, 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 crickets. Everyone's like, in there, it's in there. Now, I want you to understand that is not physiology, guys. You can't not know what muscles elevate the larynx if you are treating the patient with poor laryngeal elevation, and that is a different issue altogether. The fact that laryngeal elevation in and of itself does not mean closure. But I digress. My point here is that this has changed almost none over the years. Now, I will say that there is almost always one person in the audience who's like, longitudinal pharyngeal muscles and thyroid, boom, on the nose, baby. And of course, that person and I are like, what? And they're like, I know my muscles, and you don't know them. You don't know your muscles. I know my muscles. I mean, come on, that person should be celebrating. Why does this matter? Because understanding physiology means that, as an example, your MBS reports or your MBS studies, the way you conduct them, won't be Plinko games. If you're too out of touch and just unaware of what Plinko is, if you've heard of The Price is Right, then you'll know that there's this game where someone gets up these stairs and they have these discs and they put them over this big board with pegs. And at the end of the board, there are different dollar amounts they can make, like $0, $100, $1,000, $10,000. And you'll see they can put the disc in the same spot and it might go to different locations. So my point is that we shouldn't be like, well, let's just throw the bolus in the mouth and see where it goes. It goes in different spots. We want to get the time when it goes in the right spot. We need to understand the rationale, the physiologic rationale for, you can put the bolus in the mouth a zillion times and you'll have a zillion different results, but you need to understand why. What happened between here and here is literally the definition of our job, okay? Opportunities. Yeah. That deserve jazz hands. So at some point toward the end of whatever course I'm giving, there will be at least 3 or 4 dismayed clinicians and finally one will raise their hand courageously and say, fine, so we don't know our physiology and we need imaging to see the swallow. You've convinced me. Are you saying that the clinical bedside is useless? Oh my God, I love the exaggeration of what I didn't actually say. So at this point, what I want to get across is we are not using the clinical bedside for what it's best for. The things that it can tell us that we don't need imaging for. So at this point, I'll say, how many of you guys agree that what is important in swallowing is not just the movements that are made, but also what is perceived, what is sensed, how important is sensory? And almost every hand will go up and say, yeah, sensory is really important. And I'll say, how many of you guys do a thorough sensory test at the bedside or with the clinical swallowing evaluation? And very few hands are raised. So what is a major opportunity? A major opportunity is to enhance, increase, and implement more strategic sensory testing at the clinical bedside evaluation. So the point is that it's not that we're taking anything away by saying you need imaging or you need to understand physiology. We're saying utilize the clinical bedside for what it's good for. It's not good for knowing where the bolus went in the pharynx, or even the mouth for that matter when the person's mouth is closed. I don't think that that's quite the novel concept. It's just that people don't really want to admit what they probably know is true because they feel that their value is tied up in it. And really it's not. We need to shift gears and consider that sensory testing is an opportunity. Another opportunity is to really take into account patient wishes. More and more in medicine, people are moving toward understanding that the patient has a say-so. It exists even in our terminology, like going from compliance to adherence. And so this then directly impacts the clinicians who say things like, I just don't feel comfortable with you having thin liquids. I'm sorry, can you quantify your comfort? Because my mouth is dry right now. I'm gonna need me some water. That's what the patient is saying. They don't always care about your comfort. What they want is they want to know what their options are, and then they want to make the best possible option for themselves. What they don't want is the guilt trip associated with what would make you comfortable as a clinician. I hope you understand, and the reason I say this is because there are other fields that deal with very similar issues as we do. So endocrinologists who deal with people who have diabetes, they know that people love sweet stuff. Do you really think that they're thinking that every single person that leaves their office or the hospital is going to just say no to alcohol, say no to any sweets? No, they know that these are human beings and that we're drawn to these things. In fact, we're addicted to them. Do you really think that the internist who knows that this person's going to come back with a stroke because they love salty foods is not going to have more salty foods and come back? They know that. Do they take a personal stake in it after having educated them and said, hey guys, this is what your options are? They know people want to go out there and be human. As an example, my sister's a respiratory therapist, and she talks about patients who smoke through their stoma after having significant respiratory issues. So it's not like human nature isn't going to be more influential than your comfort. You just need to get to a point where you are giving a reasonable range of recommendations as opposed to only what you think you would want for them to do because it makes you comfortable and takes away their quality of life. Threats. Okay. Number 1 is a blame game. So usually by the end of these courses, clinicians will say, okay, you've convinced me. I need to learn more about swallowing. I need to get imaging. I need to do all these things. But there are all these barriers. Here's one that's common. I mean, it's not fair that we didn't learn about normal physiology when we went through school. You're right, it's not fair. But then at this point, I deliver bombshell number 1, which is when I graduated with my master's in 2000, I didn't know a darn thing about swallowing. I learned about swallowing from what? Reading papers, reading textbooks, going to conferences that have strong swallowing talks like Dysphagia Research Society, and asking questions, having conversations about it. Exposing myself as somebody who's not aware of how this works in an attempt to actually gain information from people who know. You got to be vulnerable and say, look, I don't know. Help me understand this. You kind of got to own it. Bombshell number 2. Guess how long people have been swallowing normally? Probably ever since Homo sapiens. I mean, maybe Homo erectus. I don't know. It's possible. But the point is, normal swallowing has been around for a long time. And papers about normal swallowing, some of them date back to the early 1900s. And a lot of the really important ones that really elucidated our understanding happened in the 90s and the 80s, because that's when video fluoroscopy started to be used routinely in science. So what I'm saying is, if you are more familiar with Urkel's common funny saying, the thing he used to say all the time,
Did I do that?
but you don't know how the UAS opens, okay, let me give you an older reference if you're not a 90s person. If you know what Arnold from Different Strokes used to say all the time,
What you talking about, Willis?
but you don't know how the larynx closes, I mean, it seems like you were doing something in the 80s and you're doing something in the 90s. This information is out there, so I would say take advantage of it. You got to own it. Blame game number 2. I mean, just fill in the blank, won't let me. Okay, so I know I need imaging, I know I need this, I know I need that, but they won't let me. Another example is, okay, I want to order X device, but my rehab manager won't let me. In fact, the PTs get everything they want, and I get nothing as a speech pathologist. So I'll say, okay, can you tell me what the trends are in your care overall? Meaning, if you want a tool to improve X function, what is it looking like now? How are you working on X function, and how much more would this tool improve it? Oh, what's that? You don't collect data on trends in your care. You can't quantify how much better anyone's getting. You don't have data to support that what you're doing is valuable, but you're asking for more money and resources to improve what you're not sure you're already doing. Yeah. So usually when I say, what data do you have? It's like, I feel like Hulk Hogan. Except there's nothing coming in. He's hearing cheers. I'm hearing nothing, or undertone jeers, because I'm asking these questions. Show me the data, guys. Show me the data. Show me that what you're doing is valuable. Now this leads nicely into the probably most unexpected threat, which is evidence-based practice. Lord, where do I start? Okay, let me remind you that there are 3 legs to evidence-based practice. There's research, there's a clinician, and there is the patient. Now, sometimes the goals of research directly oppose the goals of the clinician and patient. Here's what I mean. In research, we want 0 variability. We want group data where we pull it together and make one conclusion about everybody in that study. And if people, on average, don't do something as a group, then we say that thing doesn't exist, or it's not right, or it's negative, it's not there, there's no effect. However, in your clinical practice, you can take each individual as they are, and if each person gets better in different ways, then you have an important effect. You have clinical significance, even though sometimes studies don't show statistical significance. So, what's really important to know here is that clinicians have to understand that the goal of the research literature is to give you an idea of what the theories are out there. What is the theory of strength-based things? What is the theory of this device and how it's supposed to target something? What's the theory of sensory training? What's the theory behind skill training? And then you apply that general theory to the individual in front of you whose swallowing physiology you understand well. Do you see? Evidence-based practice does not have to be a ball and chain where it's like, oh my God, there's not evidence for the Masako. How many times have I heard that? Clinicians who understand swallowing physiology and the theories put forth by the research have the option to be creative in their approach. They don't have to feel like evidence-based practice is a ball and chain. There is never going to be a study for every patient in front of you. You're going to have to understand the diagnosis, understand the physiology, understand the theories, and then create something that is best for this patient. Collect data on it so you know whether or not it's improving or not. Guys, it's Thanksgiving holiday 2019. It is the biggest eating moment in the United States. People want to eat. This is why we care about what we do. So in my opinion, having an opportunity to connect with family, friends is so important for these patients. So hopefully you'll take all the things that I have to say in stride, in good faith. Hopefully you have a good sense of humor as I went through these. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to your comments. Happy Thanksgiving.